Okay, well, today we are going to talk about the Toronto real estate market. Surprise, surprise, surprise on the Toronto Real Estate Podcast. And we're going to delve into the group mind of the Fox Marin team to talk about the more anecdotal boots on the ground, what we're seeing in real time happening in the Toronto real estate market. There's going to be no graphs, no data. This is just going to be pure conversation with our team, some of our team members who are very, very active in the market. Today, we have Reuben Labovitz, a broker at Fox Marin, very tenured broker on our team. And if you haven't joined us before or we've never had the opportunity to meet, my name is Ralph Fox. I am the co-founder and broker of record of Fox Marin Associates, and we are a boutique residential real estate brokerage that lives, works, and plays in central and downtown Toronto. Reuben, thank you so much for joining us here today. We are really happy to have you on this thrilling talk about the Toronto real estate market. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
Okay, so without further ado, let's get into it. Reuben, what are you seeing right now in the market from a boots on the ground perspective?
I've been surprised with the amount of activity that's going on right now. It's August. Traditionally, August is a time when real estate agents, when buyers go on vacation, they take a nap, they reset and regroup for the fall market, for the start of the school year, for whatever it may be. And at least the first half of August, it doesn't really seem like we have had that. I've seen and I have been seeing way more showing activity on properties, specifically entry level freehold properties. Um, I've been seeing more offer activity than we're used to for August, and also when you compare it to even June and July, it seems like there has been a slight uptick in the market.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I think there's this notion in residential real estate where it's very seasonal, and we stereotypically have seasons with which we see a lot of activity and then a slowdown in activity. And definitely since COVID, that's gone out the window because there are so many factors that have been affecting the market outside of the market where it's far less traditional than it used to be. But I definitely agree with you that the level of activity that we have seen prior than based on what we've seen on prior months, there's definitely been an uptick in incoming calls. There's definitely been an uptick in conversations. There's definitely been an uptick in potential future activity in a way that we haven't seen it for, it feels like actually quite a long time. And so, we've had these two rate cuts. It definitely seems like another one is in the hopper for September 4th. The
Agreed.
US looks like they're going to be cutting. And I think that people truly now are moving from that idea that we're in this symbolic state right now of the market where the tightening cycle has ended, but now we're actually really starting to see significance on the potential bottom line that people are looking at when they're looking at affordability. And if this plays out the way many are forecasting, it could be a much busier fall than certainly we've experienced for quite a while.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like you said, it's mostly sentiment that has changed, and that can maybe foreshadow what is to come. It feels different than the sentiment earlier in the year when there were potential rate cuts looming. Now we've actually had two, and we'll likely have more to come.
Exactly. And a lot of the data, when you look at the Toronto real estate market, it's lagging indicators. But I think what we're seeing anecdotally, anyways, is this shift in sentiment and energy in the market that is very palpable if this is what you do every single day. And so it'll be interesting to see, is this just a blip, or is this something that's going to become a longer term trend as we move into the fall? Okay, Reuben. So tell me about like buyers. I know you work with a lot of buy side clients. What are some of the biggest concerns or pain points that you see in your conversations and in your transactions with buyers?
Yeah, I'm going to say that as of now, it's still that monthly payment. It's still that monthly mortgage payment that is keeping a lot of buyers on the sidelines, or maybe that's just starting to have them kind of poke their heads out and start to explore purchasing. Um, I'll say especially for first-time buyers, and then also for maybe for upsizers. Um, as an example, let's take a first time buyer who's been renting a one plus den for the past 7 years, and now they're looking, okay, we've hunkered down, we've saved a lot of money, we've been in a smaller space than we would like to be in, and now we're going to go and look at a 3 bedroom semi detached home. In order for them to get there, their mortgage payments are going to be $4,000 or $5,000 more than they're paying in rent right now. And even maybe if they're even not going that far, but maybe they're just wanting to make an equivalent move, they're still probably going to be paying about $2,000 more in mortgage, maintenance fees, property taxes, all of that per month than they are in rent. And so, from what I am seeing, the conversations that I am having, that is the biggest, I'll say, sticking point, the biggest concern right now, in working with buyers, and especially first time buyers who are considering um, letting go of their rental property and getting a foot in the door in the market.
Yeah, and it becomes very challenging as well because from an affordability standpoint, because they have to also qualify with the stress test, which means
Absolutely.
that at the current rate, they have to qualify for 2% above that rate. So really makes people stuck. And I think that's where that stuck feeling is that we're experiencing in the market. And it's less about price and more about how people live in their payments. They don't live in the purchase price, they live in their payments. And that's why when you see people who bought, and we talked about this on our last podcast, but when people who bought at the height of the market, at lower interest rates, they're actually living in lower payments than people who are buying at today's prices at higher interest rates. So those monthly payments really, really make a big impact on how people can actually move forward or live. And then you add in the stress test, and it can become very problematic. And I think that's why the market, going back to what you're saying, really is feeling so stuck. Okay, well, let's talk about, there's this idea, at least certainly in the condo market, we're definitely on a buyer's market. It's far more balanced in all, intents and purposes, especially central and downtown Toronto. Low rise is still in a seller's market, although a lot of buyers don't necessarily acknowledge or understand that and have to find out the hard way. So, how much negotiating power do buyers have right now? And how do you strategically approach on offering a property from a negotiating standpoint now that I guess we'll say we're in far more balanced conditions versus the way the market normally operated?
Yeah, well, like you said, you really do have to look at this from a condo versus a low rise freehold standpoint. And just what I've seen, let's just take the past 2, 3 weeks. I've seen entry level freehold properties accepting offers anytime, have multiple offers on day 3 or 4 on the market, sell firm with zero conditions. I've seen condo townhomes sell on with multiple bully offers before an offer date when it was previously listed at a higher price and couldn't sell for a number of weeks. All of a sudden, it has 2 bully offers. And so, yeah, the freehold and the low rise market is still in a seller's market if you have a good property, no matter kind of what else anybody is telling you. It's the not great properties that are not in the seller's market, but that's regardless of the market for the most part. If you are looking at purchasing a condo, that is where you have most leverage, and you can include, as you like to always say, Ralph, any and all the food groups in terms of conditions that you can include in
I
an
call it
offer.
all the conditions.
All the conditions, all the food groups. So you can have a financing condition which you wouldn't have been able to have 18 months ago. You have status certificate review conditions. You might be able to have a home inspection condition or even a condition of a sale of your existing property.
My
And
favorite, my
these,
favorite, my favorite, sorry to interrupt you, Reuben, is the
yeah,
return
yeah.
of the insurance. condition.
Oh yeah,
I've seen that one come back. It's
I
made a bit
haven't
of a
seen that
comeback.
one yet,
Oh
but
yeah, it's come back on a couple.
nice. Um, so you have the ability to include all of these conditions that are only in a buyer's favor. It gives the buyer so much more power, so much more protection. But if you are on the flip side, if you are in a position where you are able to proceed without those conditions or without most of those conditions, I like to leverage that into a more favorable purchase price for the buyer. If you can come in and maybe you're not concerned about your financing, maybe you have everything sorted out with your mortgage broker ahead of time, um, and you are comfortable and you've got the green light to go ahead with that without that condition, that can give a buyer tremendous leverage in saying, hey, look, you're not going to have to wait 5 days for the banks to give us the go ahead. We've got the check in hand. If you sign this, even if it's a lower purchase price than you were hoping for, you've got yourself a firm deal. And so there are a lot of ways to leverage conditions and or lack of conditions in a buyer's favor.
What are your expectations for of the fall, and how are you advising clients, both buyers and sellers, based on what you're seeing and expectations are for the next few months?
So my expectations, I mean, after the inflation numbers came out, there are a lot of articles, a lot of economists and banks are predicting three more 25 basis point cuts throughout the fall. I'm going to, knowing that most of those predictions are not always correct, my personal prediction is that there will be two more. I think one in September, and then either at the end of October or the beginning of December. Um, with that being said, I think that will lead us to maybe not a traditional fall market. I know you kind of touched on the lack of seasonality that we've had since COVID, but I really do think that come mid-September and early October, we're going to start seeing more quality listings coming online, and we're going to have buyers who are maybe able to get pre-approved now at lower rates that they were before. It's all in their monthly payments, as we've discussed, realizing that if they wait until next year, specifically in the freehold market, if they wait until next year, that there might be a steep incline in prices, and this might be the best time for them to get into the market. And so that's my prediction for the fall. I don't think things are going to go nuts. We also have to realize that the election will also, in the States, will also have something to do with it. And if it's anything like last time, there will be a pause. But my thoughts are back half of September going into October. October will be one of the strongest markets that we've seen so far this year.
Okay, well, I agree with most of what you're saying. I think that if you look at what's happening in the U.S. from an economic standpoint, they are weakening. There's 100% consensus of a reduction by the Fed in September. I think that's going to give a lot of latitude for the Bank of Canada to continue to reduce rates. So I'm thinking we'll see three, and I think there's a potential for a 50 basis point reduction some point along the line, just given how weak I think the economy is versus the way it's being portrayed by the powers that be. But it's going to be an interesting fall, all things considered, given what we have going on in the U.S. So never a dull moment. Reuben, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your insight and wisdom. And we look forward to having you back on the podcast sooner rather than later. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me. Happy to be back anytime.
Okay, well, here we have Jessica Spillas, aka Queen of Acquisitions at Fox Marin. Who could be more perfect to talk about what they're seeing boots on the ground from an anecdotal, conversational perspective with their clients and interacting with the overall Toronto real estate market at large? Jessica, so great to have you here.
Thank you. It's so great to be here. I always love coming on
Awesome.
the FM pod. It's my fave.
It's got to be your favorite pod. Anyways, Jess, so let's talk about this. Tell me a little bit about the market environment. It seems to be a little bit unpredictable. And are you seeing or able to make any sense of any trends or patterns? And what's struggling right now as well? So, can you kind of give us an overview and then maybe dig in a little bit?
Sure. I mean, it's an excellent question, and I think
Thank you.
unpredictable is the key word here.
Yeah.
There's really no assurances for either buyer or seller out there, and I tell everyone don't underestimate or overestimate the market right now. We've seen two identical properties listed within a week of each other that have performed in two very different ways. And so I think to understand what is moving right now and what is
That's interesting. Can you tell us a
yeah.
little bit about that?
Well, I'm monitoring a lot of condos right now. We have condo sellers and condo buyers, and I'm just fascinated by some of the market trends right now. And I think, so to give an example, there were two condos listed within a month of each other. They were identical to the square footage, both exceptionally well presented and staged, and were both priced very well, and they sold within a $50,000 spread of each other. The more recent sale was sold for more than the previous sale, which you would think it would be the opposite. And then the next unit after that sold for somewhere in the middle. So it kind of feels like somebody's just throwing blind darts. But I think the most important thing to understand right now, if you're trying to figure out why some inventory is moving and why others are not, is you have to understand what's going on in the mind of a buyer right now. And essentially, purchasers are more discerning now than they have ever been before, which makes sense because they have more options, they have less urgency, and so they're taking more time with their decisions. And for the first time, buyers are demanding more about where they're willing to live in and invest in. And so the properties that have great layouts, great views, good quality finishes are priced toward the lower range of market value. Those are selling, and they're selling well regardless of the asset class, even if it is a one-bedroom condo. But the properties that have terrible layouts, the oven is next to the toilet, and the toilet is next to where you lay your head down at night, and you can hear your neighbor taking a shower. Like, these types of challenged properties are being highlighted now more than ever, just how much we have in the city of Toronto, because they're being left behind in the dust. And they're stacking up quickly, and I don't think people realize just how much challenged inventory we have in the city of Toronto. And in previous years, people were still willing to offer up their firstborn for a 400 square foot condo that you couldn't fit a bed in the bedroom because it had a huge column in the middle of it. And people are pointing those out now more than ever, and I think that's a good thing. I think that as a city, we should demand more, especially a world-class city like Toronto, and a place that I love to live. But it is unfortunate to see plots of land that are so valuable from a real estate standpoint being developed and almost squandered in terms of opportunity because they don't allow somebody to live in them comfortably. And it doesn't necessarily have to be connected to the size of the unit. It's more so a lack of consideration of how somebody will use that property. And so anything that is challenged from a form and function standpoint right now is not selling regardless of the listing price. Even if it is the most attractive price, people don't want it. They're willing to pay more for something that they can live in comfortably, and I don't blame them.
It's interesting. We sort of have a joke that people can actually, in this market environment, buy a property that they like versus just trying to buy something. So it's a great time right now if you're a buyer in Toronto. But it can also be a very overwhelming time as well. 100%. So, are you noticing any type of a shift in sentiment the past couple of weeks? We're definitely seeing it at Fox Marin across the board. What are you seeing specifically?
So I have felt a little bit more of a buzz with buyers coming out of the woodworks, and I'm not sure if it's a function of rates starting to come down or headlines that buyers reign king in this market, but I think it's called a lot of savvy investors and buyers to action that are recognizing rather the opportunity in the market right now and trying to capitalize it before things change. And I think that's a really smart way of thinking of it and a smart thing to do, because we've said on this podcast many times, when the market shifts, it literally does so overnight. And I think a couple months ago, buyers, especially first-time buyers, were afraid to catch a falling knife. Whereas the mindset right now is, it feels like we are at or close to the bottom. And there is a lot more positivity on the horizon, especially as we see rates continue to come down. So I'm excited to see what comes.
It's really interesting because we all know how negative the media likes or tends to be, especially when it comes to Toronto real estate, whatever the spin. But I have seen in the last 2 days, again, very anecdotal, but for the first time in a long time, I've seen three articles in the last day and a half or something like that, all very positive about the outlook for the Toronto real estate market. So it's interesting. You're seeing that shift in the media. One of our mortgage broker partners was talking to us, and he said he had something like 20 new referrals last week in buyers looking to get into the market or pre-approved. So again, this is all very anecdotal, but at the same point in time, we've seen 2 interest rate cuts, and it definitely looks like there'll be a third one on September 4th. And so that definitely is playing into a lot of sentiment, and probably the media is just starting to pick up on it. So as you say, it will be really interesting to see how that plays out.
I just want to add this.
Yeah.
I think it's an important point, but I've always said that the first signs of markets changing is actually when we look at our own client database and how many of which category we have. So if we suddenly have more sellers, it could indicate that we're going to be in a season with lots of inventory. But I definitely noticed a shift in new buyer clients and the number of new buyer clients the last couple of weeks. And I think that's a really important takeaway, because in the past that has heralded a sign of a much busier market to come. So hopefully that will be the case.
Okay, I got an interesting one here for you. So for the last year and a half, we've been operating in a very historically low transaction environment. There's a lot of agents that are out there that are really, really struggling, and others that are simply just leaving the business, which is interesting because there's 80,000 realtors in the GTA. Have you noticed a shift in the quality of agents for better or for worse? Or have you seen a shift in the level of professionalism when working with other agents over the last little while?
I definitely have. And I think before I get into it, I think it's important to understand that anytime things get more difficult, it does tend to act as a natural filtering process. And I think we're seeing that in real time. Even the best agents are struggling. It doesn't mean that they're not transacting. It just means that they're doing the same thing and working 10 times harder. And I think we can all agree with that on this podcast as well. And so I'm seeing the changes depending on the type of client that I'm representing. So on the listing end, I've absolutely seen an increase in the level of sophistication and professionalism from the buyer agents who are submitting offers. And it's so refreshing to see paperwork that, is not missing information or signatures, it's in the right order, and it's such a simple thing to ask for. But I think when you have a very low barrier of entry and invariably tons of agents who do it both full-time and part-time, you're going to get varying levels of sophistication. And so I find that the buyer agents that are transacting right now are the higher quality agents that are doing this full-time and are taking it very seriously. And on the listing side, I'm actually seeing this split into 2 different categories. So if I'm representing a purchaser and I'm working with a listing agent, I am seeing either the upper echelon agent who's super professional, total pro, knows what they're doing, have been doing this for many, many years. And then I've also seen agents that offer discounted prices and don't offer the same level of service or attention to detail. and that can make the transaction a real struggle. And I think it makes sense because there's two different types of people in this world. When they enter into challenging situations and are looking for help and advice, they will either hire the best of the best and will be willing to pay a premium for it if that's what it takes. Sellers are no longer hiring their best friend or their brother, sister's, cousin's, uncle. They are demanding more from their agent, but the other half of sellers right now are just going with whoever can offer them the lowest commission, and they're using that to offset the potential discount that they would have to take on the sale of their property, which I personally don't think is the right approach. But there is definitely a bit of a duality when it comes to the quality of listing agents out there right now, and it seems like it's coming from one of those two categories.
Well, at the end of the day, you get what you pay for, and you end up paying no matter what in the long run. So it's better to work with the best. It's so interesting because we see it at Fox Marin because we are also an independent brokerage. And it's interesting and somewhat shocking how, when we are in a tight market, how many agents are calling us up like the day of close on a lease looking for $1,200 or wondering where their payments are and offering to come up and pick it up. We see that in a down market or in a slower market, and we're definitely seeing that now. And it definitely feels like there's a bit of a war of attrition out there with agents. And it's, the top 5%, the top 2.5%, even in a downward market or low transaction environment, tend to do fairly well because it's a pros market. Like the idea of taking a upside down picture of a toilet and posting that on MLS can fly in, March 2022 at the height of the market. That doesn't fly anymore. So it's definitely interesting times indeed. Well, thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. Jess, okay, what we all want to talk about, fall 2024 market predictions. Get out your crystal ball. And I know, especially short-term predictions, I'm much more comfortable with longer-term predictions. But what do you see happening this fall, and how are you advising your clients accordingly?
Okay, so it's really difficult to extract data of what's happening in the market and using that to predict where we're going to be right now, because we're at the end of the summertime and it's an unusual period. People are still on vacation. But because I have seen a little bit more activity and a buzz than we're used to seeing at this time in August, my prediction is that that's going to carry on into the fall and is going to grow from there. And I think we are going to have another rate cut. And I think that third cut is going to be the straw that breaks the camel's back to create meaningful activity in terms of properties selling and selling at reasonable prices. So I don't think it's going to be an overnight miraculous change. I think it's still going to feel a little bit more marginal in terms of the differences of what we're seeing now versus a few months from now. But I definitely predict things to get busier. I predict properties to sell faster. I predict buyers to have a little bit less leverage than they do right now. And as a result, I predict the purchase prices will go up, dare I say it.
I think you're right. Last question. Who is going to be the next president of the United States? You got a 50-50 chance.
Okay, so before Kamala came in, I was convinced that it was going to be Trump 100%. I said there's no chance for Biden. But I think Kamala is going to give Trump a run for his money. And I think at the end of the day, she's still going to have a lot of hurdles to face just being a female. But I am going to go out on a whim and I'm going to vote Kamala.
Are you voting? I didn't think you could vote.
I mean, I am married to an American, but I would have to look into those rules.
Might be worth it, or maybe it's better to sit this one out. Jess, thank you so much for joining us here today. Your opinions and insights are always super valuable, and I hope our viewers feel the same way.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
So here we have Mr. Ian Busher, broker at Fox Marin and resident heartthrob, joining us here today on the Toronto Real Estate Podcast. Ian, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate having your insights and perspective on the market. I'm sure this will be really interesting.
Thanks, Ralph. Thanks for having me.
So, Ian, when you're working with buyers, like what is the best advice you can give them right now? We're definitely, it feels like in a bit of a period of transition, but there's also a lot of unpredictability going on. And so, how do you advise your clients? What sort of advice do you give them? And what are the things you'd like to share with our audience?
Well, it's entirely possible that somebody else has already mentioned this, but it depends on what it is the buyer is looking for, right? Different product categories will dictate different strategies. But it's for that reason, the answer to this question for me is you can take your time, but don't take too much time. And you don't need to rush unless you do. So in the condo segment, there's a lot of inventory. There's a lot of options. Go and look, get experienced, see what things are selling for, if they sell at all. Test the waters there. But in the low rise and freehold segment, things are still potentially, if they're decent, selling within a week and holding back offers successfully. So, depending on what it is that you're actually after, each buyer is going to get a different answer to that question. So if you have to rush because a property is unique, interesting, in great condition, in a great neighborhood, all of those typical things, then you're going to have to shake a leg and get moving. But if you're looking at a category that has a lot of inventory, you may have a bit more time, get experienced, get exposure, see what's going on, and then think about making your move.
It definitely is a tale of two markets, and definitely different approaches, very much related to the amount of inventory and affordability. Taking this one step further, do you find that buyers in this particular market are being more specific or particular about their must-haves versus other markets? Are you sensing that people are being really nitpicky versus just trying to get the first thing in front of them?
There's definitely not a rush to get the first thing in front of them, I would say. But the
Like
potential,
the FOMO is definitely out of the market
yeah,
across all
yeah,
property types.
yeah, exactly. Leaving a client in 2021 and saying, okay, well, we just looked at 8 properties and I'll see you next Saturday was just like you were talking to your clients every hour, if not every hour, at least every day. And now you can get back to people the next week and say like 6 out of 8 of those are still available. So there is that time for sure. Um, and we talked about this earlier in a separate meeting, but people can get analysis paralysis as well. There's too much in the way of options. There's too much time for some people in certain categories. So I like to use the 3 E's.
The 3 E's?
The 3 E's. Yeah. Brought to you by Ian, the 3 E's. Education,
Yeah,
exposure, and experience.
I love it.
And between those 3 things, give people the room, give buyers the room and the space to get out there, see some things, see what's going on. And then, gingerly, gently remind them that the market conditions could shift in the fall and, potentially in the spring too. And things can turn on a dime, as we both talk about all the time. So going back to question 1, take your time, but don't take too much time. And make a decision, and hopefully you don't have to compromise on too many things. But yeah, people are being a little bit picky, and sometimes it's them getting in their own way.
I love the 3 E's. How come I've never heard that before?
We'll put it on a successory poster and hang it up in the office.
I think so. And you'll just sign it right on the bottom there. So having been in the business as long as you have, and having seen a lot of market cycles at this point, in this environment, like what are the differences and what are the challenges in this market versus past markets from both an agent and a buyer perspective that you're seeing?
One of the biggest struggles I think in 2024 right now is that moving a property requires a lot more exertion than in better market times, right? This 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 weak market showcases the value and the strength of your agent, your listing agent, unless they don't have any value or they don't have any strengths, in which case that gets showcased. Um, so what's most important right now, I would say, is accurate pricing, managing both buyer and seller expectations, and clear and effective marketing and communication. And that's what will lead to success. But it's tricky out there.
So as an agent, how are you seeing a difference in this market versus past markets?
I would say for every effort you made every effort you made as an agent in past markets, now that effort's got to be multiplied by 10. For every one phone call, there's 10 phone calls. For every tough conversation, there's 10 tough conversations. So that's really what it is. It's the heavy lifting of both buyers and sellers.
I wonder why we're so exhausted. Well, thank
Right.
you for that. Exactly. And okay, last question here, Ian. What are your predictions for fall 2024?
I think obviously we're going to see the Bank of Canada interest rate reduction. Looks like we're getting a Fed rate reduction. I think we're going to see sort of a light rally for September, October, a very quiet November to mid-January, and then a stronger spring market where we potentially start to see freehold prices increase and maybe some of that condo inventory decrease as first-time buyers maybe start jumping in with lower interest rates.
So a little bit of sideways pricing, but pick up in activity for the fall. And then things might start to heat up on the other side of the U.S. elections with more rate reductions into the spring.
Yeah. As you and I have discussed, the election in the U.S. is definitely going to be a major distraction. But I think...
Do you say distraction or dumpster fire?
Good point. Good point. A little of both. A lot of both. So yeah, I think up to Thanksgiving, we'll see a bit of a climate activity. I have been discussing this with other agents and a couple of them have pondered, are there a lot of agents that are holding back a lot of inventory for September? Will we actually see a glut of freehold inventory coming out that might actually, like you were saying, keep the prices sort of flatlined because of the options? But only time will tell.
Ian, as always, thank you so much. It's a pleasure having you on the Real Estate Podcast. And thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and insights.
Thank you. We'll see you in the fall market.
Indeed, we shall.
Thanks, Ralph.
Okay, well, last but certainly not least, we have batting cleanup Jerome Werniuk, agent, sales representative at Fox Marin. And Jerome is going to share his insights into what he's seeing boots on the ground in the market right now, which is always an ever-changing topic. Jerome, so glad to have you here, and we absolutely are looking forward to hearing your thoughts and insights.
Likewise. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so let's talk about it. What are you seeing right now in the market?
By Toronto standards, I'll preface that everything's generally just slow right now. You've got inexpensive freehold, which I'll categorize under 1.3 million. It's probably getting the most traction of any asset class or snap bracket. Condos are still incredibly slow. Luxury market's still slow. I think probably the most interesting, notable thing that we're seeing, because we're just used to having houses sit on the market for like kind of max 2 weeks in normal market conditions, is that we're seeing a lot of homes getting relisted with offer dates, then not offer dates, then back to offer dates. And we're seeing like a very checkered history for listings that are on the market, where listing agents and sellers are trying as many sort of tricks as they can to try and spur interest. So you'll get a home that's relisted after 3 weeks on the market, offers any time, it'll get relisted with an offer date. No offers come in, it'll get relisted again, but it'll have a new set of photos for it, just to try and create something. And we haven't really seen that for a very long time. So listing agents are getting savvy, and clearly the buyer pool isn't really responding yet. The biggest sort of scary part or listings I'm seeing that make me most nervous or sorry for the sellers are that people that purchased homes back sort of peak pricing 2020 to 2022 dumped a bunch of money into renovations and then for whatever reason needed to sell, whether it was life change, new job somewhere else. Those people are just taking an absolute bath on the sales price, and big renovation after buying at peak of market, just a recipe for disaster here for a lot of sellers right now. It's a tough time for them.
Yeah, I mean, the basic advice, no matter what the market is, if you're buying a property and you're going to be doing significant renovations, that you should be doing it in the context of it being at least a 5-year hold before you actually can theoretically justify that type of expense, even if it's your principal residence. And so you are right. Whoever is selling in that situation is probably not a seller of choice, but a seller of circumstance. And those are the ones who definitely, when you add up all of the costs of acquisition and the purchase price, those are the ones who are going to be feeling it the most. And that's why whenever we talk to anybody, our bottom line is, if you don't have to sell, regardless of the asset type in this market, sensing that we're at or close to the bottom or straddling the bottom, then don't. And so but you are right, like that's the demographic that definitely is going to be feeling it the most. But it is interesting because if you look at the market, we're at 36 days or whatever the number is on average. I mean, relative to any other market in the world, that's still considered to be blistering fast for sales. So it is interesting how in our own minds we're adjusting to a slower market that by any other standard is quite quick. Generic condos aside, which just basically aren't selling right now. Okay, well, thanks for that. And any insight into some of the conversations that you're having with people right now about the market? In some of our other team members that we've had on this podcast today, they've all been talking about a shift in sentiment, a little bit more positive, optimistic, a little bit more energy out there. Are you seeing that in your sphere and with your clients?
I wouldn't say with clients. I mean, as a real estate agent, you end up talking about real estate with everybody, whether it's somebody in the grocery line or on a golf course. Like, it's just what you talk about. And so,
And it's what people want to talk to you about as well.
yeah, completely. Yeah. I mean, you got the tabloid section right beside your real estate agent in the checkout line at Loblaws. Like, it's pretty good options for gossip here. And I would say the most common thing I've heard over the last, let's call it 3 or 4 weeks, is I've seen so many for sale signs up right now on my street. Like, how bad are things? And it's kind of like, are you okay, Jerome? Is everything all right? Like, is the world falling apart? That's been the common sentiment and questions I've been getting. And we're lucky at Fox Marin. We built an incredible business. We've got a fantastic base of clients, and our business has kept on chugging, even though average transactions are down right now. But I think that buyers that I've been talking to, and I'm going to categorize them as first-time buyers that have been kind of floating around for the last 2 years, they see the signs of this being a pretty damn good opportunity to buy their first property, but nobody's really pulling the trigger. And I don't know if that sentiment has changed in my sphere of the world. I think a lot of the conversations I have are really driven by headline reading. You see a headline of, record number of properties sitting on the market right now, properties selling for 20% less than it did, 4 years ago. Things like that are what the general population or consumers are usually fixated on. And so a lot of those conversations I have in the grocery store line usually are kind of clarifying a bunch of headlines and giving them the actual data of what's happening on the market and anecdotal.
Like prices are only down 4% year over year,
Exactly.
or whatever the number is. It's mind blowing when you look at that one fact versus all of the other headlines that are out there. And do you have any sort of projections about things that are out there from geopolitical or macroeconomic events that you're looking at that could affect things in the fall?
Yeah, I mean, paranoid or not, you kind of always have black swan events in the back of your head when you're thinking about real estate and advising clients. And I mean, as you said earlier, you want to always be thinking about holding real estate for at least 5 years. That should be your minimum timeline. I think I think the U.S. election is probably going to be the biggest distraction in terms of it being news cycle headline news pretty much every day leading up to the election. And frankly, quite honestly, it's probably going to be right up until inauguration, the way the last election went. So I think that's going to be dominating. I think it's generally Gen Xers and above that are tracking that and really deep, constantly obsessive about U.S. political news cycle, more so than millennial buyers and sellers. So I think that part of the population is going to be fixated on it. I think last election there was a slowdown, like people kind of stopped, just watched what was happening in the election, and then got back to business as usual afterwards. And I got my hair cut yesterday. The barber that was cutting my hair just moved up from Georgia and was talking about why he didn't want to live in the U.S. anymore and loved Canada. And the biggest headline news in Canada, pretty much every single U.S. election cycle, is like the number of move to Canada searches on Google has spiked. And it's going to be interesting to see whatever direction the election goes, how the market's going to react to that. But my prediction is just like it's going to be a big distraction for sure in October. I don't think it'll really impact things in September. And then larger and way more unpredictable, ongoing global conflicts escalating from where they're at right now to more widespread, more countries getting pulled in. And I think the interesting story out of the UK, sad and interesting, last week was all of the unrest with people protesting around immigration policy. And it's a very easy scapegoat when things are not going well in an economy, unaffordability is going up. And I really, really hope that this does not spill into Canada in any way, but I think it's going to be a very hot topic of conversation, maybe as early as the fall market, that could impact sentiment around the real estate market.
Absolutely. It's so interesting. I remember when Trump won in 2020, the Canadian immigration website crashed that night, which I thought was interesting insight. And I'm sure we're in for a lot of those type of events between now and whenever. But there also comes a point where it's like, well, life has to go on and people have to make their own decisions, and people can't just get caught up in this dumpster fire that's going on to the south of us right now. So what are your projections for the fall, taking all of this in a consideration? What are you expecting to see, and what are you advising clients who are looking to make a move?
I'm just going to call one out. I don't want to go too deep into it. I can if you want. These are all guesses, but I wouldn't be shocked if we actually see a 50 basis point cut on September 4th. It's a bit of a flyer. I know the banks aren't betting on that. Economic data, I don't know. It's just my gut says that something, we might have this coming down the pipeline. The big question, whether it's 25 basis points, which I think is sort of the minimum expectation, or if it's 50, the big question is we're going to know what's happening in the fall market by the third week of September. So we say interest rate cut September 4th. A bunch of people are saying, oh, I'm excited now. Let me plug in my RBC mortgage calculator. Oh, this is a lot more affordable than it was, a month ago. Call up a mortgage broker, get a pre-approval. A week later, they're out there looking at properties. And a week after that, you're going to start to see offers come in. So if that September 4th announcement carries any weight, and we do see a lot of first-time home buyers show up later in September, I think we're on for a big run up in the fall here. Now, the other kind of way it could go is kind of continuing what we've seen here. I've heard there's been a spike in mortgage pre-approvals in the last few weeks here. And I think that we should see at a minimum, whether it's 25 basis point or no cut at all, I think we're going to see more demand in September than we did in June and July. But buyers are going to have less leverage no matter what, in my opinion, in the fall than they do currently in these market conditions. And I guess the next step beyond that is there's a lot of sellers out there that have been sort of waiting, holding back their listings, seeing the elevated inventory levels. And if all of that pent up inventory that hasn't been released to the market is dumped into the market in September, October, it's going to be interesting to see if there's enough demand to keep up and hold prices where they're at, or even have a run up, which is all in the cards. So I didn't really give you a prediction there, but if I had to say, I think we're going to have a small run up in the fall. I don't think it's going to be gangbusters until Q1, Q2 next year.
But you are thinking that there'll be an uptick in activity regardless.
Yeah, regardless. I think people come back from, holiday, vacation, time at the cottage in August. Kids are back in school in September. All of a sudden, we're staring down another bleak winter here in Toronto, and they need something exciting in their lives to get them through the winter. And maybe shopping for a house could be that answer this year.
I think you've got a lot of people sitting on the sidelines, and I think another significant rate cut here on the 4th and on the 17th in the US could be a very important signal, moving from symbolic to significant. And we could see rates, the overnight well under 4% by the end of this year. And I wouldn't be surprised if that happens. So for sure, I think we will see a lot of more activity online with what we're seeing now. But how this all plays out really remains to be seen. I mean, a lot of people were projecting that when that first cut would come in June, that we would see all these buyers come to the market. But the actual fact is we saw the opposite. We saw all of these sellers sitting on inventory come to the market, and the buyers were still sitting on the sidelines. And because of that, we saw more of a buildup in June and July than people were expecting of inventory. So the buyers are out there. Some are sitting on the sideline for sure. It'll be interesting enough to see if this next upcoming cut will be enough to push them over the fence to get them into the market. And I guess time will tell on that. Jerome, thank you so much for joining us. Your wisdom, your insights, always appreciated. And thank you so much for tuning in to the Toronto Real Estate Podcast. My name is Ralph Fox, and if you like this information, if you find it helpful, please be sure to hit that like or subscribe button. And if you have any comments that are constructive or positive, we would absolutely love to hear from you. Thanks so much for tuning in, and thanks again, Jerome, for joining us.
Thank you.